Short questions, short answers.
I have a question.
Okay.
Wait, hold on. I'm sorry. I'm wondering, there's been 2 identical bills filed in both the Senate and the House regarding gaming. So this has raised concerns, or not concerns, red flags in Miami-Dade that there could be a potential casino opening up in the Fontainebleau.
Yeah.
Is that something that you would be supportive of?
My focus really is, you've got this new Seminole Compact. You heard my comments, which I think is a great outcome given the history between the tribe and, going back, that we devote all of those monies to natural resources for the long term. I think it's a beautiful outcome for those monies to be used for that purpose. My focus is on making sure we get, set up on the compact, and we focus on that, don't stub our toe, get off to a good start, get that money flowing in to help Florida's infrastructure, especially for the environment.
So you're not supportive of the permit changing?
My radar is focused on how do we set the compact up for success, and that's where I'm fully focused on, to the exclusion of other things out there that are competing.
Speaker, I was wondering what you thought of the bill that was filed by Representative Masulo that would add a 10% cap onto smokable marijuana if it is legalized by voters in November. What's your take on it?
Well, I think Dr. Masulo has a good point there. I think the experience in places like Colorado, regardless of where you fall on the recreational marijuana question, is the marijuana that's being produced and used in states like Colorado is not your Cheech and Chong marijuana. It's not the old school marijuana that grew out of the ground. It's been supercharged, and so we want to make sure, if that's the direction that people go, that voters out there are not misled into believing that marijuana is not so bad if it's at a super high THC level. Now, whether 10% is the right number or 50, I don't know. I mean, that's for the membership to decide. We'll have the conversation, talk about the science, talk about, at what point does a high THC level start to induce real serious medical problems that would cause that question to tilt in the other direction. So I think that's the purpose behind the bill. I think it's a good purpose to have the conversation. We'll see where we land.
On insurance, OIR over the weekend released a report following up on SB 76, the data collection over litigation and whatnot. I was curious if you had seen that report and what you made of its findings, which weren't, kind of said that, there seems to be a litigation issue, but there also seems to be an insurance issue.
Well, it's multifaceted. I think of 3 categories, and I know they mentioned the claims, adjudication process, and that's something the insurers, I guess, need to tighten up and look at. But there's 3 real factors. One is litigation. We fixed that, I believe, in the special session, and you're already seeing for the first time significant citizens depopulation. I spoke to the commissioner the other day. There's actually an insurer out there that's reduced premiums, and others that you're starting to see a little bit of this. But look, if reinsurance is going up 50% and we say it only went up 25%, so there's a 50% reduction, that's not any reason to pop the champagne cork. It's still going up 25%. But nonetheless, directionally, we're going in a good direction initially. But it's not the complete puzzle to the point of the study. The other one that we can address is mitigation. We had additional monies we put in My Safe Florida Homes during the special session. I really like that program. I think the Senate President does as well, and our membership does. I can't remember the figures he gave me, but for every dollar we spend there, the savings in terms of reducing the severity of a storm on someone's home is significant. And really, we can't fix probability, which is that they look at probability and severity when they're looking at underwriting these policies. We can't fix, Mother Nature is going to send us what it does. But I think the future, now that we've handled litigation, the future is really in this mitigation lane to look and say, we're going to look at stronger building materials, these kinds of programs to help, especially the low-income folks, the elderly on fixed income, to make sure they get those first front-of-the-line privileges to get their homes battened down. So if a storm does come, instead of $100,000 worth of damage, it's $10,000 worth of damage.
Representative Roach he doesn't think that this is going to work. And he has a bill that would basically require or have citizens basically offer hurricane and tropical storm policies. And he's not optimistic that that bill will get a hearing. This seems like an idea that should be debated in a committee, should be scored by EDR or something like that. I understand that you had expressed some interest in at least exploring this idea. Have you seen his bill? What do you think that should be heard?
Let me jump back because
Sure.
I mentioned three things in name two.
Oh, okay.
So the
I think
third
you
thing that we really can't control is the uptick in construction costs, the uptick in property values. It costs more money, independent from litigation and mitigation, to own a home. Therefore, insurance, obviously, there's pressure upward there. So we can't fix that, but we can do a lot, I think, and have done a lot in litigation, and we can do more, and I want to see us do more over the years to come on the mitigation front. So I've not read all of the bill, but I bet President Pasademo has. But I've talked to Representative Roach, and I told him that I thought it was important to have that conversation. And it's an idea that, I think California did something like that with wildfires. And the question is, should the taxpayers basically take hurricanes off the table and let insurers kind of deal in the world of non-hurricane related claims? That would be your homeowner's insurance there. I don't know, but he did chat with me. I said, let's have a conversation. Never afraid of a conversation. One of your colleagues from the Tampa Times had emailed me about something similar to that. And I think it's something we have to consider. Because look, we were in a position a year and a half ago, and I don't think we are now, where we weren't sure we were going to have reinsurance, which is why we went towards that place that normally Republicans wouldn't go, saying we're going to put a pot of money together to kind of backstop reinsurance. This is taking that a step further to take it completely off the private side and put it on the taxpayers. I mean, that's a conversation we can have. I hope that the reforms we've made, along with additional mitigation measures, will allow the private market to come back in. We'll see some stabilization. That is always the best outcome, where private parties are taking the risk, not the taxpayers, for a hurricane that happens hundreds of miles away from their home.
Can I ask you an elections-related question? There's I'm not sure how far it's going to get, but there was a bill filed that would almost completely eliminate mail-in balloting in Florida, return it to the excuses that used to be in place prior to the 2002 changes, which the Republicans were the ones who made the change of going to no excuse mail-in balloting. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on whether you would be supportive of scaling back mail-in balloting to that extent.
No, I think that was the president's answer, so I'll be as brief as she was. Look, I think on all things election law, there's two pillars. Make it easier to vote, expand the franchise, give everybody an opportunity to vote in multiple different ways, which we do through mail-in voting, through early voting, through election day voting, but harder to cheat. The cheat part, where the concern lies on absentee voting, which is real, is there's not a lot of chain of custody control. Somebody can receive a ballot, somebody can mark that ballot up, somebody else signs it. That person may not be, have the wherewithal to really understand what's happened, and then somebody else has voted their ballot. We don't want that to happen, no matter who they're voting for. Republicans have been convicted of ballot fraud too. I mean, it's a bipartisan problem. And so my issue would be making sure we have the greatest integrity for our election system. Both sides have claimed, this election wasn't legitimate. Both sides have done that. We don't want to be in that place as America. We want to know by 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night, as we do in Florida now, that the race is called, these people have won, these people have lost, and people can feel good about it with some backup, whether it's a paper ballot. We can do some auditing and look at those kinds of things. But I'm not looking to recede from the easier to vote piece. I would rather look at, let's just make sure we've got the controls in place to make sure it's still harder to achieve.
Mr. Speaker, next week, as you know, there's a special election for a House seat, suburban Orlando. Mm-hmm. My question is this: regardless of who wins that election, will you commit to that person being sworn in as soon as the votes are certified?
Sure, yeah.
I guess another bill filed that Senator Pasademo said she does not support, but it's in this chamber. It's one that would create a near total ban on abortion. Is that legislation that you support and expect to move this session?
Well, the legislation I supported was what we passed last year, which is to say that, we're going to, at the point a child, an independent human being, has a heartbeat, that there's some need to protect that human life, with exceptions for rape and incest and human trafficking and the life of the mother and all these multitude of exceptions we have, which are different cases and need a different treatment. We had Roe v. Wade for 50 years, where the courts not only said it's okay to take that life at any point up in 40 weeks until the time of birth, but also it's not only it's okay, but it's a constitutional right. And so culturally, I just don't believe we're in a place where we're ready to take that step. In a perfect world, I would love to see there be no abortions. We live in a fallen world, not a perfect world. And so I'm realistic about that. I think where we are is where we are. And going forward for the short term, the midterm, and who knows over time with science and education where people may change their minds. But right now, that's not where I think the majority of Floridians would be, and I respect that. And I think we're going to stay put with where we are, and let's let that get implemented, hopefully with the court's approval.
Hey, sir, Orange County last week approved a local bill that would...
Orange County, you said?
Yeah, Orange County legislative delegation approved a local bill generated by a senator that would basically take a step back on the Central Florida tourism oversight and go back to having Reedy Creek as the governing body at Disney World. There were a lot of procedural questions raised at the meeting, including whether a local bill should be originating from a Senate office in the first place. Can you tell me, is there any path forward for that legislation to be considered in the Florida House?
Man, that's a boring topic. I mean, I'm sorry. It's a boring topic. But I think we're in the right posture, which is however you want to slice it, you shouldn't have a corporation running a special, nobody else has their own government. And so whether you think the current Reedy Creek is perfect or it can be modified over time is a question, but I think we've gone on the right path at least. So I don't want to go back, and I'm not familiar with what they did if they went back to give it all back to Disney and the 5 people that live there. But I think we're in a good spot. I think we're moving on to see how that goes. The new district has come out with some reporting on how things were before that I think in large part justify the move that was made, and it's time to move forward. So I'm not looking to revisit that again for Disney round 4. I think we've come to a place that we've come to.
Mr. Sanders, Mr. Speaker, healthy idea, which I'm thinking is going to happen this year. The Senate President has ruled out Medicaid expansion. Now you had a guy over here, Representative Rudman. He's been talking about, Navarre Republican and a doctor says the state should be expanding Medicaid. It's basically free money coming into Florida, federal money that could expand access. I'm wondering, is that idea of Medicaid expansion really dead on arrival in the House?
It is dead on arrival, but not because of lack of consideration. So here's the difference in philosophy. As I believe, as a conservative Republican, I do believe in a safety net. I believe we should have compassion and help people that cannot help themselves, that cannot get health care but for our help. The elderly, the poor, the disabled, people that can't physically work to earn the money to pay for their own health insurance, even in part. And so you have a choice to either make that safety net, the true safety net, which we all, I think, have a consensus around, robust, which we did here in the House. We took Medicaid rates for pediatric care for children on Medicaid from almost the bottom of, I think, 45th in the country to the very top. We're making some fixes actually to add to that to make sure we are at the very top in the country so that every child in Medicaid has access to a physician. That's important to me. It's important to many of our members on both sides of the aisle. You can't do that if you're spending billions and billions of dollars on Medicaid expansion, the vast majority of which would be targeted to people who are not disabled, who do not have children, and who are of working age. And if they work even part-time, as the math works, they're eligible for an exchange plan, that, the bronze, silver, gold. And so you're really talking about a philosophical perspective that healthcare is a right at that point. That I'm sitting home as a 40-year-old living with my parents playing Xbox, and I should be able to knock on your door, John, and say, pay my health insurance, because healthcare is a right and you owe me that and you should pay for that healthcare, as opposed to people who can't go out and work and make it on their own. I want to take care of those people, which we did on pediatric rates, we did on kid care and expanding eligibility for kid care. And you'll see this year again, I mentioned poverty cliffs that are important to me, that we smooth those out. We don't give people a perverse incentive to decline a promotion to make $1 when they lose $2 or $3 or $4 or more in public assistance, so that we can help people get to a place of independence. And so you can't do those things fiscally if you're down the path of everybody gets free stuff when they don't really have they don't really fit in that real social safety net.
Well, just to follow very, very briefly, but I think from a Rudman point of view, for example, it's money that hospitals are currently paying out that they're not getting compensated for, and there's federal money that would be made available with expansion. Why not take it?
Well, I'll tell you why, because it also comes with strings attached, and of course that federal share goes down over time. It's billions of dollars. It is, and it's just for the reasons I mentioned. Philosophically, that is not what most people, I think, even including Democrats and independents, if you present them with that and explain to them the population that is mainly affected there, they would say, yeah, let's do more for people that can't get help. I mean, they can't work. They're home and they're poor, and kids especially. That's where our priority is. We're on the same page with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle to let's look at ways we can make Medicaid work for the true safety net and not blow the budget. And that's why states like California, the governor mentioned today, have a $68 billion deficit or $69 billion. How does that happen? They got way more money on a per capita basis than we did, the way they set that up, than Florida did, and yet they're in a $68 billion deficit. And we've got now, I mentioned 11 billion, that's grown to like 13 plus since we were out of session. So we're doing it the right way. We can't give all things to all people, and if it's not a true safety net, it goes back to Margaret Thatcher's, saying is that the great problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money. And so we're not going to break the budget. We're going to be, and it's important to me this year that we have a fiscally constrained budget, that we look ahead. It's the best of times this year, that we look ahead so that when we have a recession, we're not looking at teachers and saying, hey, we're sorry, we have to cut your salary. Or we're not looking at Medicaid recipients and say, we're going to have to bump your reimbursement rate back down, and now doctors won't want to see you. We want to keep in place and also expand what we're doing on infrastructure for roads, for land conservation, for the environment. We only do that by truly prioritizing. And frankly, that's what this afternoon was about. The federal government is on cruise control at a fast rate toward financial collapse. And I say that in a bipartisan way. Republicans are responsible for that. Democrats are responsible for that. There's a total lack of fiscal discipline. Why? Because there's not those constitutional guardrails that we have, where we have to say, look, we got to prioritize. We've done that. It's worked. It's a story that can be told in 10 different ways. They're all positive for Florida, and it's reflective of those states that don't have those guardrails, how they've gone off the rail. And so I'm hopeful, and it was misstated today by one of the Democrat members, we're not bypassing the states. The way it works, just as a quick history lesson and civics lesson, Article 5 has two paths. You can go through Congress and get 2/3 of a vote, which that's what the Democrats wanted us to do, is let Congress do it. Well, how many years, anybody know offhand how many years we've been a country now? 200 and how many? 40? I mean, what are we up to? Over 2 centuries, Congress has not done that. I don't anticipate that anytime soon either party is going to step up and do that. And so the other way is through 2/3 of the states. It's 34 for those counting. And then you still have to go the next step and get 38 states or 3/4 to ratify. So it's Congress or the states proposing an amendment. And then at that point, it's the same. 38 states have to ratify. There's only 2 things I can think of that would ever, pass muster with 38 states in today's climate. Balanced budget, which I think a lot of independents and Democrats do support. It's a supermajority, favorability. And then term limits is ridiculous. It's like puppies. It's 90% want term limits. So they want us to get in and get out.
What about the fear the Democrats raised about a runaway convention?
Well, that's why you don't have to worry about it, because let's say some crazy thing emerged out of the convention. It's got to get 38. It's got to get 38 states to approve it. There's too much balance in the country. Unless you're going to get Democrat states to come on board with you, which I think you can definitely do for term limits, and I hope you can do for a balanced budget, you're not going to get there. So there's not going to be anything crazy. There's a lot of conservatives that worry about a convention. It ain't happening, because you got to get 38 states, and nobody's going to do crazy that many times. So
I've got the last question right here. Mr. Speaker, over here. Your energy legislation has been introduced, and I think you talked about it at Tiger Bay last month. Is it going to expand the burning of gas at the expense of reducing carbon emissions and addressing climate change?
No, I don't believe it will. If I had a magic wand, would say clean energy 100% tomorrow. but I don't have a magic wand. And everybody who is honest knows that the artificial timeline that is being placed on the move from our current energy structure to a cleaner energy future and a fully clean energy future is arbitrary. And the result of that will be, by going so far, so fast, you will dramatically undermine the standard of living of working class Americans, middle class Americans, where they will pay substantially more for their electric bill. They will pay substantially more when they go to refuel their tank, whether it's electric or gas or otherwise, because we're moving on an artificial timeline. So what I would like to see us do is two things, is make sure that, just like the Federal Reserve has a mission of full employment and CPI and controlling those things, is that the state of Florida through the PSC has in mind low cost, reliability, meaning the grid isn't compromised, and domestically sourced. All three of those I could spend more time unpacking, but they're critical to us not being dependent on countries like China for electric, batteries, that type of thing. It's critical that we preserve the middle class and the working class by keeping it low cost. And then at the same time, the other problem is the politics involved in this, and pushing so far, so fast for this net zero on an artificial timeline. At the same time, the Biden administration is saying everybody's got to drive an electric vehicle. Well, that puts a huge, exponentially greater demand on the electric grid. So at the same time we're bringing down grid reliability, we are increasing grid demand. And don't take it from me, but there's an entity that's their purpose is to look at grid reliability, and they're predicting that we are at risk on our current course for brownouts and blackouts. That is not what you expect in a first world country. And so I want us to be grounded. And then the second thing is the legislature, as we move forward into new areas of energy, which I'm very excited about. I think we will get to a completely clean energy future that is affordable as all those things. It's affordable, reliable, and domestically sourced, is that the legislature has to be involved in that. And the idea that we would delegate out major new changes and major new expansions into energy world without legislative involvement, to me, strikes at the separation of powers. We want to reclaim that. We want to make sure the legislature has the legislative role. And then when it comes to making rates and everything, obviously the PSC would handle that piece. But that's kind of the goal of energy. A lot of words, maybe not a lot of legislation, but it's important to keep that anchor that we're in charge of energy policy in the broadest sense, and we want to make sure that's grounded to the interest of the people that we represent, that we don't break their budget, we keep their standard of living high, the reliability of the grid in place and sure and certain, and that we make sure we don't depend on other countries like China, so it's domestically sourced and we can produce our own energy, and I hope that's clean energy, and I believe it will be.
Doesn't state law already say reliability and cost for PSC?
I don't know how far it goes, but we want to be crystal clear, because there's a lot of outside pressure on a lot of the electric companies to come in and say, look, my activist investors are telling me I got to do this, and so sorry, but we're gonna increase your cost 25% to get on this artificial timeline. I don't think that serves the interest of Floridians on balance. And I know other people, if you believe the world's coming to an end in 10 years, then I guess you have to do that, and we all have to just fall into poverty. But I don't think that's a realistic or necessary step. We can get there. I want to get there, but let's be realistic about it and make sure we're taking care of people's standard of living in the process and our national security. Thanks, everyone.